Further comments? The member from Nepean Carleton.
Thank you, Speaker. When you're going through hell, keep going. A simple enough statement, but one spoken by the British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, would become the defiant call to action by Britain and her allies in the Second World War. The boldness, the audacity, and frankly the clarity of those words echo around the free world even today as the clarion call for the brave and the courageous. Many young Canadian men answered that call between 1939 and 1945. They would become known as Canada's greatest generation. They built our country. Because of them, Canada came of age as a nation. Ernest Cote was born in Edmonton, a lawyer and a French-Canadian soldier with the famed Montreal-based Vandus was among them. After graduating from Laval, Ernest Cote left for England as a lieutenant with the Royal 22nd Regiment, just months after being admitted to the bar in Alberta. Eventually, he'd be in charge of logistics as Canada prepared for the invasion of Normandy on the beach of Juno, one of our greatest military accomplishments, one that still instills national pride in every Canadian. Mr. Cote went on to become a diplomat with External Affairs and Deputy Minister with Veterans Affairs, among other government departments. He exemplified what it meant to be a Canadian public servant, a war hero who would go on to speak at the United Nations on Canada's behalf, a governor at the University of Ottawa, a regent at the University of Sudbury. He supported the Canadian Geographic and L'Hôpital Montfort. Above all, he was committed to keeping Canada's legacy of the Second World War alive, and I'm grateful he did. Let me explain. There's days I walk into this chamber, as I know others do, feeling a bit overwhelmed. I often look to the ceiling. And I think about our founding fathers, and I think about those who sacrificed in our world wars and subsequent wars. I think of how small I am and how small we all are in the context of those giants. I think of the sacrifices of that generation to maintain peace, order, and good governance. It's not lost on me that we have freedom of assembly, freedom of expression, freedom of the press, freedom of speech, and freedom of worship. We got that because of Ernest Cote's generation. Those who fought in the Second World War, it's important to remember, fought to either protect or to regain those freedoms. It's also not lost on me that when Ernest Cote and his generation went to fight in the Second World War, this assembly was nearly homogeneous. Forget the names Lisa, Christine, Andrea, Sherry, Deb, or Kathleen. It wasn't until the end of the war there was just one Agnes. There weren't names like Fideli, or Yakabuski, or Gretzky, or Singh, or Demerla, or Nakfi. Ontario's first female premier and the head of a government in an English-speaking world that was openly gay would never have seemed possible. But because of that generation, because of men like Ernest Cote, because of their sacrifices and their valor, nothing in this country or in this province is impossible to achieve. Through them, we enjoy unlimited potential and opportunity. All we have to add is hard work and sometimes a lucky break. The same can be said of our friends in the press, who I'm proud are here today. The Christina Blizzards and the Martin Reg Cohns of the world are free to write their opinions, free to speak freely, free to criticize the government and, Lord knows, the opposition in recent days, because they have no fear of retribution because of the Ernest Cotes of the world. Ernest Cote and his fellow soldiers fought against a vile, oppressive, and hateful regime to end and defeat the Holocaust. Today, Jewish Canadians, any Canadian, need not fear their government because people like Monty Quinter and Guy Marteau prove they can be government. That is the legacy of Ernest Cote. So I say to this Assembly, and it is an appeal, when a Canadian veteran or a soldier passes, it is up to us to honour and embrace their legacy, for without them, the values, the ideals, the comforts that we cherish, yet sometimes take for granted, might not be available. Some might disagree, but I respectfully suggest look at Ernest Cote's path. Look at those who have followed him, who have still continued to fight against religious and ethnic persecution in the world, who sacrificed to ensure little girls get to go to school in Afghanistan and that their mums get to vote, and who have been deployed to restore self-government and freedom of the press, as is happening elsewhere in the world. In that sense, Ernest Cote, at 101 years old, was especially profound. We, by the virtue of speaking freely in this assembly today, are part of that legacy. Ernest Cote died in every Canadian's second hometown last week in the city of Ottawa. A Canadian hero, he was mourned, and he is mourned by an entire nation. He was the last of the D-Day colonels. His service was marked with distinction, and until the very end, we all know he was gutsy. Though he was recently in the news for an unjust, unlawful, and un-Canadian act against him, he shouldn't be remembered for that. Instead, he should be remembered for his resolution, for his contributions to Canada and our sovereign, and above all, for his bravery. One of Ernest's last interviews was the result of that heinous experience. Perhaps characteristically of him and his generation, he said, "I was never afraid. I was madder than a wasp. Wasps ain't afraid. They're mad." Now, at least 70 years after Churchill's declaration, the boldness, the audacity, and frankly, Speaker, the clarity in Ernest Cote's words still echo around this country as the clarion call for the brave and the courageous. On behalf of the Ontario Progressive Conservative Caucus, I wish to extend condolences and thanks to Ernest Cote's family. I want them to know we shall remember him. And to Ernest Cote, I say rest peacefully and God bless you. Thank you, Speaker.